My name is Victoria Sterling, and for 32 years I believed I was exactly what my family said. I was the disappointment, the failure, the daughter who couldn't get anything right. Every family gathering was a masterclass in humiliation, with my parents comparing me to my perfect sister Charlotte, while I stood there taking it, believing I deserved their contempt. But that New Year's Eve in Greenwich changed everything. As I watched my father raise his champagne glass to mock me in front of 200 elite guests, as my sister sneered about my pathetic single life, as strangers laughed and pulled out phones to record my shame, something inside me finally snapped. They thought they knew who Victoria Sterling was. They had absolutely no idea. What happened when the clock struck midnight didn't just shock my family, it shattered their entire world. The question is, what happens when the family scapegoat turns out to hold all the cards? Let me take you back to where it began. Let me start at the beginning on December 30th, 2024 inches my Manhattan penthouse overlooking Central Park. I was 32 years old, a senior federal prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I hadn't spoken to my family in 3 years. 3 blissful years of building a life they knew nothing about. The phone rang at exactly 7 in the morning. I knew without looking it would be my mother. Margaret Sterling had this uncanny ability to call at the worst possible moments, like she had a sixth sense for when I was finally at peace. Her voice cut through the receiver like broken glass. "Victoria, thank goodness you answered. We need to discuss tomorrow evening." Tomorrow evening was New Year's Eve, and I had absolutely zero intention of spending it in Greenwich, Connecticut, watching my family perform their annual ritual of worshiping my younger sister Charlotte while treating me like the family disappointment. I'm working mother. I always work New Year's Eve. It keeps me out of trouble. Don't be ridiculous. The Ashworth family will be there. Charlotte's in-laws, you know. We need to show family unity, especially with Benjamin's father investing in that new project with your father's firm. Of course it came back to business. Everything always did with the Sterling. I pressed the phone closer to my ear and stared out at the snow-covered park below. My penthouse apartment cost more than most people's houses, but my family assumed I lived in some cramped studio scraping by on a government salary. Victoria, are you listening to me? This is important. Charlotte has done so well for herself marrying into the Ashworth banking family. It reflects well on all of us. We need you there to show we're a united family. United family. That was rich coming from the woman who spent my entire childhood comparing me unfavorably to Charlotte at every opportunity. Charlotte's more graceful. Charlotte has such natural talent. Why can't you be more like your sister? I will not be coming, mother. I told you this last year and the year before. I have work commitments. Her voice shifted to that familiar, manipulative tone I'd heard since childhood. Your grandmother specifically asked for you, Victoria. Eleanor's not doing well. The doctors say this might be her last New Year's Eve with us. My heart clenched. Grandmother Eleanor was the only person in my family who had ever truly loved me. She was 83 now, and I hadn't seen her since my last disastrous family gathering 3 years ago, when my father publicly berated me for my career choices at Charlotte's engagement party. What's wrong with her? The cancer's progressed. She's been asking for you constantly. She keeps saying she has something important to tell you, something that can't wait. Victoria, she may not make it to see another year. I closed my eyes and felt the familiar tug of guilt that my mother wielded like a weapon. Eleanor had always been different from the rest of them. She saw me, really saw me, when everyone else looked through me or past me. Fine, I'll come for Eleanor, but I'm not staying long and I'm not participating in any of your family theater. Oh, wonderful. And Victoria, perhaps this year you could bring someone, a nice man from work, maybe. You're 32 now, and people are starting to ask questions about why you're always alone. I touched the chain around my neck where my engagement ring rested, hidden beneath my silk blouse. If only she knew. I'll see you tomorrow, mother. The line went dead, and I stared at my reflection in the dark window. Tomorrow I would return to the battlefield of my childhood, to face the people who had spent decades making me feel small and worthless. They had no idea that their family's scapegoat had become one of the most powerful prosecutors in the country. They didn't know about my successful prosecutions of organized crime families, my spotless conviction record, or the fact that hardened federal agents sought my advice on complex cases. And they certainly didn't know about Alex. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to his contact. Alexander Kane, CEO of Kane Technologies, worth $15 billion, and the man I'd agreed to marry 2 years ago. He was supposed to be in Tokyo closing a major government contract, but knowing Alex, he'd probably find a way to surprise me. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family thought I was a failure who couldn't even get a date while I was secretly engaged to one of the most powerful men in America. A man who saw my worth when my own blood relatives were blind to it. Tomorrow night, I would walk into that Greenwich mansion and endure another evening of condescension and cruelty, all for the sake of seeing Eleanor one last time. What I didn't know was that this New Year's Eve would be different. This would be the night everything changed. This would be the night they finally learned who Victoria Sterling really was. My morning routine had always been my sanctuary, but today it felt like suiting up for war. I stood in my marble bathroom applying concealer under my eyes, preparing to face the people who had taught me to expect the worst from family gatherings. The irony wasn't lost on me that I spent my days interrogating dangerous criminals with perfect composure. Yet the thought of dinner with my parents made my hands shake. My phone buzzed against the granite countertop. Alex's name lit up the screen, and for the first time all morning I smiled. "Good morning, beautiful. How are you holding up?" I touched the screen and heard his voice warm and steady like always. Even through the phone, Alex Kane had this way of making everything seem manageable. "I'm fine. Just getting ready to drive into enemy territory." He laughed, that rich sound that never failed to calm my nerves. "You know I could still cancel the Singapore meetings. I'm actually in New York finishing up some emergency contracts. I could be there in 2 hours." My heart jumped. Alex was supposed to be halfway around the world, but he was here in the same city. For a moment I imagined walking into that Greenwich mansion with him by my side, watching my family's faces as they realized exactly what they'd been missing. "No," I said, though every part of me wanted to say yes. "This is something I need to handle alone. Besides, your government contract is too important to risk over my family drama." "That contract isn't more important than you, Victoria." Nothing Island. 2 years we'd been engaged, and he still said things that made me believe I was worthy of unconditional love. We'd met at a cybersecurity conference in Washington, where I was representing the prosecutor's office in a joint task force on organized crime. He'd approached me during the coffee break, not with some cheesy pickup line, but with genuine questions about digital evidence in racketeering cases. Most men were intimidated when they learned I put crime bosses behind bars for a living. Alex found it fascinating. He said watching me cross-examine a defense attorney was when he knew he wanted to marry me. "I promise I'll check in with you later tonight," I told him. "If things get too awful, maybe I'll call for extraction. I'll be monitoring my phone all evening. One text and I'll come get you, contracts be damned." After we hung up, I stared at myself in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the insecure girl who'd grown up in Greenwich. I'd chosen a simple black dress, elegant but not flashy. My grandmother always said I looked beautiful in black, though my mother preferred Charlotte in pastels because they made her look more innocent and approachable. I opened my jewelry box and pulled out the engagement ring Alex had given me 2 years ago. 3 carats, perfect cut, set in platinum. It was worth more than my parents' annual country club fees, but they'd never seen it. I'd worn it on a chain around my neck from the day he proposed, hidden like so many other parts of my real life. The drive from Manhattan to Greenwich took an hour in good traffic, but I drove slowly, postponing the inevitable. Connecticut's winter landscape rolled past my window, all bare trees and old money estates tucked behind stone walls. This was the world I'd grown up in, where appearance mattered more than substance and social standing trumped everything else. My phone rang as I passed the Greenwich exit sign. My mother again. "Victoria, please tell me you're on your way." The Ashworths are arriving at 5 and it would look terrible if you weren't here to greet them properly. I'm 20 minutes out, Mother. And you're bringing someone correct. I mentioned to Patricia Ashworth that you might finally have good news to share. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. She'd already started spreading rumors that I had a boyfriend, setting me up for public embarrassment when I arrived alone. I never said I was bringing anyone. Well, you should have. Charlotte will be there with Benjamin, looking absolutely radiant. They're talking about having children soon, you know. Patricia was asking about your situation, and I had to make excuses again about your career focus. My career focus. As if prosecuting organized crime was some kind of hobby that prevented me from finding a husband. If only she knew that my career had brought me exactly the right man, someone who respected my work, instead of resenting it. I'll see you soon, Mother. The Sterling family estate came into view as I rounded the final curve. Imposing colonial architecture, perfectly manicured grounds, circular driveway, with a fountain that had been featured in Architectural Digest twice. This house had been my prison for 18 years, the place where I'd learned that love was conditional and approval was something you had to earn. But I wasn't that scared little girl anymore. I was Victoria Sterling, the prosecutor who'd taken down the Morrison crime family and the Castellano money laundering ring. I'd faced down killers and won. Surely I could handle one evening with my parents. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw movement in the upstairs window, Eleanor's room. My grandmother was watching for me, probably the only person in this house who was genuinely happy I'd come. I took a deep breath, checked my phone one more time for any message from Alex, and stepped out of my car. The cold December air hit my face, and I heard voices from inside the house. Charlotte's laugh, bright and musical, the same laugh that had charmed everyone since she was 5 years old. Time to face the firing squad. The front door opened before I could reach for the handle. My mother stood there in her signature pearls and a burgundy cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Margaret Sterling had perfected the art of looking effortlessly elegant, though I knew she'd spent hours getting ready for this evening. Victoria, finally. You look so serious in that black dress. Couldn't you have chosen something more festive? It's New Year's Eve, not a funeral. Hello to you too, Mother. She stepped aside to let me enter, her eyes already scanning me for flaws to criticize later. The foyer was decorated with white orchids and gold accents, everything perfectly coordinated like a magazine spread. Classical music drifted from the main living room, where I could hear multiple conversations happening at once. The Ashworths arrived an hour ago. Patricia was asking about you, wondering why you never visit. I told her you're very busy with your work, but honestly, Victoria, people are starting to wonder. Wonder what? Whether you're ever going to settle down and have a normal life? You're 32 now. Most women your age are married with children. I bit back my first 3 responses, all of which would have started a fight before I'd even taken off my coat. Instead, I handed her my wool peacoat and looked toward the living room where I could see Charlotte holding court near the fireplace. My sister looked exactly like she had in all the society page photos I'd been avoiding for 3 years. Blonde hair in perfect waves, wearing a champagne-colored dress that complemented her complexion beautifully. She was laughing at something a tall, dark-haired man was saying. That must be Benjamin Ashworth III, her husband of 2 years. Victoria, there you are. Charlotte's voice carried across the room as she noticed me standing in the doorway. She glided over with practiced grace, the kind that came from years of cotillion and finishing school. She embraced me with the same enthusiasm she'd show a distant acquaintance. You look well, very professional. She emphasized the word professional like it was a consolation prize. Thank you. Congratulations on your marriage. I'm sorry I missed the wedding. Oh, that's right. You had some important work thing. What was it again? I'd been prosecuting a human trafficking ring, but Charlotte wouldn't understand the significance of that. A case that required me to work with federal agents and testify before a grand jury, but to her it was just another excuse I'd made to avoid family obligations. Just work, nothing as exciting as a wedding. Benjamin approached us, extending his hand with genuine warmth. You must be Victoria. I've heard so much about you. I shook his hand, surprised by his friendly demeanor. Most of Charlotte's boyfriends had treated me like furniture, invisible unless they needed something. Benjamin was different. He looked directly at me when he spoke, like he actually wanted to hear my answers. "Charlotte tells me you work for the government. That must be fascinating work." Charlotte laughed, that tinkling sound that had always made adults smile and forgive her anything. "Oh, Ben, Victoria prosecutes criminals or something like that. Very serious work. Nothing glamorous like what your family does in banking." "Actually," Benjamin said, still looking at me, "prosecuting criminals sounds incredibly important. What kind of cases do you handle?" For a moment, I considered telling him the truth, that I'd spent the last 5 years taking down organized crime families, that I had a 97% conviction rate, that federal judges respected my legal arguments. But Charlotte was already steering Benjamin away toward another group of guests. "Oh, you two can talk shop later. Ben, you simply must meet the Hendersons. They're thinking about investing in that new fund your father mentioned." I watched them walk away, Benjamin glancing back at me with what looked like apologetic interest. Maybe Charlotte had found a decent man after all, even if she was already trying to isolate him from any meaningful conversation with me. The living room was full of familiar faces from my childhood. Greenwich Society families who'd known each other for generations, who'd attended the same prep schools and belonged to the same country clubs. They nodded politely when they saw me, but their eyes were already searching for someone more interesting to talk to. Mrs. Peterson from down the road approached with her signature blend of sweetness and poison. "Victoria, dear, how lovely to see you. Still single, I see." Well, there's someone for everyone, I always say. Sometimes it just takes longer to find the right person. Sometimes the right person finds you when you're not looking, I replied, thinking of Alex. "Oh, how mysterious. Are you seeing someone special?" Before I could answer, my mother appeared at my elbow. "Victoria focuses so much on her career she barely has time to date. We keep telling her she needs to make herself more available." The familiar shame crept up my neck. Here I was, a successful federal prosecutor engaged to a billionaire, being discussed like a charity case, who couldn't manage her own love life. "I need some air," I said, excusing myself, before I said something I'd regret. I made my way upstairs, my footsteps muffled by the thick Persian runner. The second floor was quieter, away from the party conversation and clinking glasses. Eleanor's room was at the end of the hall, and I could see warm light spilling from under her door. I knocked softly and heard her familiar voice call out for me to enter. My grandmother was sitting in her favorite armchair by the window, wrapped in a cashmere shawl. She looked so much smaller than I remembered, her once vibrant presence diminished by illness, but her eyes still sparkled when she saw me. "My darling Victoria, come here and let me look at you." I knelt beside her chair and took her frail hands in mine. She felt like delicate bird bones, so fragile I was afraid I might hurt her. "You look beautiful, sweetheart, and tired." "Are they giving you trouble already? When don't they give me trouble?" "Nana," she squeezed my hands with surprising strength. "I have something very important to tell you tonight, Victoria. Something that's going to change everything." Eleanor reached toward her bedside table, her movements slow but deliberate. She pulled out a thick manila folder, yellowed at the edges, and held together with a rubber band that looked like it had been stretched to its limit many times over. "This contains 30 years of documentation, Victoria. Every cruel comment, every dismissive remark, every time they made you feel less than. I started keeping records when you were 7, and your father told you that smart girls don't need to be pretty because you'd won the science fair." My heart clenched as I remembered that day. I'd been so proud of my volcano project, but instead of celebrating, my father had made it sound like a consolation prize for not being as naturally beautiful as Charlotte. Eleanor's fingers worked to remove the rubber band, and she opened the folder to reveal pages of handwritten notes, photographs, and what looked like printed emails. The top page was dated 15 years ago, with my grandmother's neat handwriting describing a family dinner where my parents had spent an hour discussing Charlotte's acceptance to Juilliard while barely acknowledging that I graduated summa cum laude from Yale. I've been documenting everything because I knew someday you'd need proof that this wasn't in your head, that their treatment of you was real and documented and wrong. Tears stung my eyes as I flipped through page after page of evidence. Birthday parties where Charlotte received elaborate gifts while I got practical items. School events where my parents attended Charlotte's dance recitals but missed my debate championships. Family photos where Charlotte was always positioned in the center while I stood at the edges. Nana, why didn't you ever say anything? Because I was a coward, sweetheart. I was afraid if I spoke up they'd cut off my access to you completely. And you were the light of my life, the grandchild who actually talked to me about books and ideas, instead of just asking for money. She reached for another document from the folder, this one official looking with a law firm's letterhead. I've rewritten my will, Victoria. I'm leaving everything to you. The house in Cape Cod, the investment, accounts, the jewelry, all of it. $50 million total. I stared at her, unable to process what she was saying. But what about Dad and Charlotte? Your father gets nothing. He's made enough money destroying families through his law practice. Charlotte gets nothing because she's already been given everything her whole life. But you, my darling, you've earned every penny through sheer strength of character. Eleanor's voice grew stronger, more determined. I want you to promise me something, Victoria. Promise me you'll stop hiding who you are to make them comfortable. Stop diminishing yourself so they don't feel threatened. You're brilliant, you're successful, and you deserve to be celebrated, not tolerated. The weight of her words settled over me like a warm blanket. For the first time in my life, someone in my family was acknowledging not just my pain, but my worth. There's a young man in your life, isn't there? I touched the chain around my neck instinctively. How did you know? Because you're glowing in a way you never did before. And because you keep touching something under your shirt like it's precious to you. I pulled the chain out, revealing Alex's ring. Eleanor's eyes lit up. He must be quite special to earn Victoria Sterling's heart. His name is Alex Kane. He's kind and brilliant, and he sees me for who I really am. Kane. As in Kane Technologies. You know the company, sweetheart. I may be old, but I'm not dead. I read the Wall Street Journal every morning. Your Alex is quite accomplished. We've been engaged for 2 years, but I've never told the family about him. Because you're protecting him from them. Smart girl. But Victoria, you can't live your whole life hiding your happiness from people who wouldn't appreciate it anyway. A soft knock interrupted us, and my mother's voice carried through the door. Victoria, dear, you've been up there quite a while. Our guests are asking about you. Eleanor squeezed my hand and whispered urgently. Remember what I told you tonight. You don't owe them anything, but you owe yourself everything. I helped her close the folder and return it to the bedside table, then kissed her forehead gently. I promise, Nana. I promise I'll stop hiding. As I walked back downstairs, the folder's contents swirling through my mind, I felt something shift inside me. The scared little girl who'd spent decades seeking approval from people incapable of giving it was finally ready to step aside. The party had grown livelier in my absence. More guests had arrived, and the champagne was flowing freely. I could see my father holding court near the bar, his voice carrying over the crowd, as he told some story that had everyone laughing. But I wasn't that invisible daughter anymore. I was Victoria Sterling, armed with the truth, and my grandmother's blessing to finally live authentically. The living room buzzed with pre-dinner cocktails and Connecticut high society at its finest. I moved through the crowd with practiced ease, nodding politely at familiar faces, while keeping my emotional armor firmly in place. The champagne flutes caught the light from the crystal chandelier, and everything looked exactly like it had at every Sterling family gathering for the past 3 decades. I found myself gravitating toward a corner where I could observe without being the center of attention. That's when I overheard my father's conversation with Benjamin and 2 other men I recognized as partners from his law firm. The government security sector is exploding right now, my father was saying, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd spent 40 years winning cases. We're representing TechSecure in their bid for the biggest contract in years, $750 million. Benjamin shifted uncomfortably. Richard, I'm not sure we should be discussing this so openly. My father waved dismissively. It's hardly classified information. Besides, we're among friends here. TechSecure has this contract locked up. The competition is some upstart tech company that thinks they can outbid established players. I felt a chill run down my spine. Government security contracts tech companies $750 million. Alex had mentioned he was closing a major deal, but he'd been deliberately vague about the details for security reasons. "What's the competing company?" asked one of the law partners. "Kane Technologies, run by some young hotshot who thinks he knows better than companies that have been in this business for decades." My blood turned to ice water. They were talking about Alex's company. My father was representing the competition against my fiancé's business, and he had no idea of the connection. Benjamin looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Dad, maybe we should talk about this later. Privately." "Nonsense. The Ashworth Family Bank has significant investments in TechSecure's success. When they win this contract, your family's portfolio benefits substantially. It's a win for everyone at this table." Everyone except Alex, I thought. Everyone except the man I loved, whose company my own father was working to destroy while simultaneously mocking me for being alone. Richard continued, emboldened by the champagne. "Between you and me, Kane Technologies doesn't stand a chance. Their CEO is too young, too aggressive. Government contracts go to companies with proven track records, not flashy startups. If only he knew that Alex's company had revolutionized cybersecurity for 3 different federal agencies, and that his reputation in Washington was impeccable. But my father lived in his small world of Connecticut legal circles, where old money and established connections mattered more than innovation or results. Charlotte appeared at Benjamin's side, sliding her arm through his. "What are you men discussing so seriously? You look like you're planning to take over the world." "Just business, darling. Your father-in-law is helping us secure a very important contract." "How exciting! Though I'm sure Victoria wouldn't understand any of this. She's never been interested in real business, have you, Victoria?" I realized with a start that Charlotte was addressing me directly. I'd been so focused on the conversation about Alex's company that I hadn't noticed her approach. "I understand more than you might think," I said carefully. "Oh, I'm sure you deal with lots of important paperwork in your government job. But this is high-level corporate strategy. The kind of thing that requires real business acumen." The condescension in her voice was so familiar, it almost felt comforting in its predictability. Here was my little sister, married for 2 years, explaining business to the woman who'd spent the last 5 years prosecuting corporate fraud cases worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Richard jumped in with enthusiasm. "Victoria prosecutes small-time criminals, Charlotte. Nothing like the corporate world. She wouldn't understand the complexities of government contracts and competitive bidding." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Small-time criminals. If they only knew I'd taken down the Morrison crime family's money laundering operation, which had involved government contracts, competitive bidding, and corporate fraud on a scale that would make their heads spin. Benjamin was watching me with growing interest. "What kind of cases do you typically handle, Victoria?" Before I could answer, Charlotte laughed that musical laugh of hers. "Oh, Ben, don't encourage her. Victoria gets so serious about her work. It's not exactly dinner party conversation." My mother materialized beside us, as if summoned by some invisible signal. "Victoria, dear, you look so intense. This is supposed to be a party. Try to look like you're enjoying yourself." The irony was crushing. Here I stood, surrounded by my family, who thought they knew everything about me, listening to them discuss their plan to defeat the company owned by the man I was secretly engaged to marry. They had no idea that their family scapegoat was connected to the very person they were working against. I excused myself and walked toward the powder room, needing a moment to process what I'd just learned. In the hallway mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself and saw Eleanor's strength reflected back. Her words echoed in my mind about stopping hiding who I was to make them comfortable. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "Just finished the final presentation. Feeling confident about tomorrow's decision." "How's the family gathering?" I stared at the message, knowing I couldn't tell him what I'd just discovered. Not tonight when he was focused on the biggest contract of his career. Not when my own family was actively working against him without knowing it. Instead, I typed back, "It's exactly what I expected. Can't wait to see you later." As I returned to the party, I realized the evening had taken on an entirely different meaning. This wasn't just about enduring another family gathering. This was about watching my family unknowingly attack the most important person in my life while continuing to treat me like their greatest disappointment. The countdown to midnight suddenly felt like a countdown to reckoning. By 9 o'clock, the Sterling mansion was filled with 200 of Greenwich's finest. The guest list read like a who's who of Connecticut society, banking families, tech executives, politicians, and old money dynasties that had been intermarrying for generations. Everyone was dressed to perfection. Champagne flowed like water, and the conversation hummed with the comfortable arrogance of people who'd never worried about money a day in their lives. I navigated through clusters of familiar faces, enduring the same conversations I'd been having at these gatherings since I was old enough to attend. Mrs. Whitman from the country club wanted to know why I never came to the charity luncheons anymore. Dr. Peterson's wife asked if I was still working for the government and whether I'd considered a career change to something more suitable for a woman my age. The Henderson twins, now both married with children, expressed concern about my single status with the kind of false sympathy that made my skin crawl. "Still no ring on that finger, I see," said Amanda Henderson, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "You know my cousin Janet met her husband at 35. There's still hope." I smiled politely and excused myself to get another club soda, though what I really needed was space to breathe. The weight of Eleanor's revelations combined with the knowledge about Alex's contract was making it hard to maintain my usual composed facade. Near the bar, I spotted Benjamin standing alone, looking almost as uncomfortable as I felt. He was checking his phone with the expression of someone who wished he was anywhere else. Not enjoying the party, I asked joining him at the marble bar top. He looked relieved to see a friendly face. "Is it that obvious I love Charlotte? But these society gatherings aren't really my thing. Too much posturing and not enough genuine conversation." I was surprised by his honesty. Most people in our social circle spent their lives perfecting the art of saying nothing while appearing charming. What would you rather be doing on New Year's Eve Reading, honestly? I've got this biography of Alexander Hamilton that I can't put down. Charlotte thinks I'm incredibly boring. You're not boring. You're just interested in substance over spectacle. He smiled gratefully. "Victoria, can I ask you something? Why does your family treat you like you're some kind of failure? From what I can see, you have an important job, you're clearly intelligent, and you seem to have your life together." His question caught me off guard. It was the first time anyone in this family had acknowledged the obvious disparity in how I was treated compared to Charlotte. "That's a complicated question with a complicated answer. Try me. I've got time." Before I could respond, Charlotte appeared at Benjamin's elbow, her radar finely tuned to any moment when her husband might be paying attention to someone else. "There you are, darling. The Worthingtons are here, and I promised we'd say hello. They're thinking of donating to my foundation." She linked her arm through Benjamin's possessively, then turned to me with that smile I'd seen 1,000 times, the one that looked warm and sisterly to outside observers but carried a clear message to me. "Victoria, you should mingle more. You're being antisocial again." "I was just talking to Benjamin about books," I said evenly. "Oh, how sweet. Victoria's always been the bookish type, very academic. I suppose when you don't have much of a social life, you have to fill the time somehow." The casual cruelty in her voice was so familiar, it barely stung anymore. This was Charlotte at her finest, delivering insults disguised as observations, making her superiority seem natural and inevitable. Benjamin frowned. "There's nothing wrong with being intellectual, Charlotte." "Of course not, darling. Victoria's very smart. We've always said that. She just never learned how to use her intelligence in practical ways like finding a husband or building a real career." A real career. As if prosecuting organized crime was some kind of hobby I'd picked up to pass the time. I excused myself before I said something I couldn't take back and made my way toward the windows overlooking the garden. The December air had frosted the glass, and I could see my breath when I stood close to the panes. Outside, the landscape was pristine and cold, everything covered in a thin layer of snow that made the world look clean and untouched. My phone buzzed. Another text from Alex. Contract decision delayed until tomorrow morning. Spending evening reviewing final details. Miss you. I typed back quickly. Miss you too. Everything will work out. If only he knew that his biggest competition was being orchestrated by my own father, who was probably upstairs right now, reviewing strategy with his law partners while planning to humiliate me in front of 200 guests. Victoria, there you are. I turned to find my father approaching already well into his evening's alcohol consumption. Richard Sterling was one of those men who became more animated and aggressive as he drank, his voice getting louder and his opinions more pronounced. I've been looking for you. Patricia Ashworth was asking about your situation again. She seems to think there might be someone special in your life. There isn't anyone special, Dad. That's what I told her. I said Victoria's married to her work, like a lot of career women her age. Sometimes ambition comes at the cost of personal happiness. He delivered this observation like it was profound wisdom instead of a thinly veiled criticism of my life choices. Maybe personal happiness isn't defined the same way for everyone, I said carefully. Of course it island. Family, children, building something lasting with another person. That's what matters. Everything else is just distraction. The irony was suffocating. Here stood my father lecturing me about family while spending his evening plotting against my fiancé and preparing to publicly humiliate his own daughter. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 10:30, and I realized we were an hour and a half away from midnight. An hour and a half away from my father's traditional New Year's speech, which I now understood would be the opening act of what was shaping up to be the most devastating night of my life. At 11:30, my father moved toward the center of the living room, with the practiced confidence of a man who'd spent decades commanding courtrooms and dinner parties with equal ease. The conversations gradually quieted as people noticed Richard Sterling positioning himself near the grand piano, champagne flute in hand, preparing for his annual New Year's Eve tradition. Everyone began gathering around him in a loose semicircle, the way audiences naturally form when they sense a performance is about to begin. Charlotte and Benjamin moved to the front, her hand resting possessively on his arm as she beamed with anticipation. My mother stood slightly behind my father, her posture perfect and her smile radiant, ready to bask in whatever eloquent words her husband was about to deliver. I found myself at the back of the crowd, near the archway leading to the dining room, close enough to hear, but far enough away to escape if necessary. Something in my father's demeanor tonight felt different, more charged than usual. The alcohol had loosened his tongue and sharpened his edges in a way that made my stomach clench with familiar dread. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and family, my father began, his lawyer's voice carrying easily across the room. As we stand on the threshold of another year, I want to take a moment to reflect on the blessings that have graced the Sterling family. The crowd murmured appreciatively, champagne glasses glinting in the chandelier light. This was exactly the kind of speech Greenwich society expected from Richard Sterling, gracious, refined, full of gratitude and optimism. This has been a remarkable year for our family. Charlotte's marriage to Benjamin has brought such joy to Margaret and me. Watching our daughter find love with such a fine young man from such a distinguished family has been one of the highlights of our lives. Charlotte practically glowed under the praise, her smile brilliant as she accepted the approving nods and warm glances from the assembled guests. Benjamin looked pleased but slightly uncomfortable with the public attention, which only made him more endearing to the crowd. The Ashworth family has welcomed us with such warmth, my father continued, raising his glass toward Benjamin's parents. Their success in banking, their commitment to philanthropy, their dedication to family values, these are the qualities that make a family truly wealthy. More murmurs of agreement, more raised glasses. This was the part of the evening everyone expected, the celebration of success and social connections that made these gatherings feel important and meaningful. But then I saw something shift in my father's expression. His smile took on a different quality, sharper and more calculating. He was scanning the crowd now, his eyes landing on me for just a moment before moving on. "Of course," my father said, his tone still warm but with an undercurrent that made my skin prickle. "Not every path in life leads to the same destination. Not every member of a family finds their way to the same kind of fulfillment." The crowd sensed the change too. Conversations that had been murmuring in the background fell completely silent. All eyes were on Richard Sterling, waiting to see where this unexpected turn would lead. Margaret's smile flickered slightly, as if she wasn't sure whether to be concerned or excited about what was coming next. Some people find love early and build beautiful families. Others focus so intensely on their careers that they lose sight of what really matters in life. My heart began to pound. I could feel the direction this was headed, could see the trap being laid with the precision of a closing argument. My father was about to make me the centerpiece of his New Year's Eve entertainment, and there wasn't a single thing I could do to stop it. Benjamin shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the room, as if he sensed something wrong but couldn't quite identify what it was. Charlotte, however, was watching our father with bright interest, as if she knew exactly what was coming, and approved wholeheartedly. My father's eyes found mine across the crowded room, and I saw something in his expression that chilled me to the bone. This wasn't going to be a gentle ribbing or affectionate teasing about my single status. This was going to be a public execution designed to humiliate me in front of 200 of Connecticut's most influential people. "Here we have my eldest daughter, Victoria," he said, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room, "still waiting for her life to begin at 32. The nervous laughter started immediately, uncertain at first, but growing bolder as people realized this was meant to be amusing rather than cruel. I stood frozen in place, watching my own father prepare to destroy me for the entertainment of his guests. The clock on the mantelpiece showed 11:45. 15 minutes until midnight, 15 minutes until whatever was going to happen next. My father's voice grew stronger, emboldened by the crowd's uncertain laughter and the champagne coursing through his system. He was in full performance mode now, playing to his audience like the seasoned attorney. He was building his case against me with ruthless precision. Poor Victoria couldn't even find a date for New Year's Eve. Here we are celebrating new beginnings, and she shows up alone once again. The laughter grew louder, now less uncertain, and more genuinely amused. These people were enjoying this, finding entertainment in my public humiliation. I could see phones being pulled from purses and pockets, some guests discreetly positioning themselves to capture what was clearly becoming the evening's main event. Charlotte joined in with that musical laugh of hers, the sound carrying clearly across the room. Maybe this year she'll finally lower her standards and settle for someone. Anyone, really. The crowd erupted in louder laughter, and I watched my sister beam under the attention. She was loving this moment, basking in the contrast between her successful marriage and my apparent failure to find love. My mother added her voice to the chorus, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "We keep hoping she'll bring someone home to meet us, but year after year, it's just Victoria all by herself." Margaret shook her head sadly, as if my single status was a personal tragedy that had befallen the entire family. Patricia Ashworth was watching me with the kind of pity reserved for wounded animals, while her husband looked genuinely uncomfortable with the direction the evening had taken. Now my father raised his champagne glass higher, preparing for his grand finale. The room fell silent, except for the soft clicking of phone cameras capturing every moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's raise our glasses to my daughter Victoria. Proof that not all of us can find love, but at least she has her little government job to keep her busy." The crowd erupted in applause and laughter that felt like physical blows. I stood there watching 200 of Connecticut's elite celebrate my humiliation, their faces blurred by the tears I refused to let fall. Someone wolf whistled from the back of the crowd. Another voice called out something about government benefits being better than marriage benefits. but something strange was happening inside me. Instead of the familiar shame and need to shrink away, I felt a cold clarity settling over my mind. Eleanor's words echoed in my consciousness about stopping hiding who I was to make them comfortable. The folder full of documented cruelty upstairs suddenly made perfect sense. This moment would be the final entry. I looked directly at my father, who was still basking in the crowd's approval, his face flushed with alcohol and triumph. Our eyes met across the room, and I saw him falter slightly at whatever he saw in my expression. "Remember this moment," I said quietly, but my voice carried in the sudden silence that had fallen over the room. The certainty in my tone seemed to cut through the laughter like a blade. Something in my posture, my voice, my complete lack of shame or embarrassment made the crowd shift uncomfortably. My father's smile wavered as he tried to process what had just happened. Benjamin was staring at me with something that looked like admiration mixed with concern. Even Charlotte's triumphant expression had flickered into uncertainty. The phones that had been recording my humiliation were still rolling, but now they were capturing something entirely different. My mother stepped forward, her voice sharp with warning. "Victoria, don't make a scene. This is meant to be fun." "Fun for whom, Mother?" The question hung in the air like smoke. I could feel the crowd's energy shifting, sensing that something was about to happen, but not quite sure what. The comfortable cruelty they'd been enjoying was transforming into something more complex and dangerous. My father tried to regain control of his audience. Now, Victoria, don't be so sensitive. We're just having a little fun on New Year's Eve." But his voice lacked its earlier confidence. The man who'd spent 40 years intimidating witnesses and opposing counsel was suddenly uncertain, faced with a defendant who refused to accept his verdict. The grandfather clock chimed 11:55, and I felt my phone buzz against my hip. Without breaking eye contact with my father, I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. Outside. One word that changed everything. Alex was here. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and straightened my shoulders. The scared little girl who'd spent 32 years seeking approval from people incapable of giving it was gone. In her place stood Victoria Sterling, federal prosecutor, soon to be Billionaire's wife, and Eleanor's granddaughter who'd finally learned her worth. The next 5 minutes were going to change everything. The front door opened with quiet authority at 11:57, and I felt the energy in the room shift before I even saw him. Multiple figures in expensive dark suits entered, first moving with the practiced efficiency of professional security personnel. They positioned themselves strategically around the room's perimeter, their presence immediately commanding attention without saying a word. The crowd began turning toward the entrance, conversations dying mid-sentence as everyone tried to understand what was happening. My father still held his champagne glass aloft, frozen in confusion, as his carefully orchestrated humiliation was interrupted by something he couldn't control or explain. Then Alex stepped through the doorway, and my heart nearly stopped. He was 6 feet 3 inches of commanding presence, wrapped in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. His dark hair was slightly windswept, his jaw set with determination, and his intensely blue eyes scanned the room with laser precision before landing directly on me. Everything else fell away. The crowd, the humiliation, the laughter, all of it became background noise as Alex moved through the room with natural confidence that made people instinctively step aside to create a path. He walked directly toward me with purpose and tenderness, ignoring my father completely, despite Richard's sputtered attempts to understand what was happening. "Excuse me, this is a private party, my father," called out his voice, cracking slightly with uncertainty. Alex didn't even glance in his direction. His focus was entirely on me, and when he reached where I stood near the back of the crowd, he took my face gently in his hands with the kind of intimacy that spoke of years of shared love and trust. "Sorry I'm late, darling," he said, his voice warm and clear enough for the nearby guests to hear every word. Then he kissed me. Not a performative display for the crowd, but a genuine greeting between two people who loved each other deeply. His lips were warm against mine, and I could feel the tension leaving my body for the first time all evening. When we separated, his arm moved protectively around my waist, and he turned to face the stunned audience. The countdown had begun somewhere in the background. 10, 9, 8. But it felt surreal and distant compared to the electricity crackling through the room. "I'm Alex Kane," he announced, his voice carrying easily across the silent space. "Victoria's fiancé." The name recognition hit the crowd like a physical wave. I could literally see the moment when people connected the dots, when Alex Kane stopped being just some handsome stranger and became Alex Kane, the billionaire CEO whose company had been splashed across financial headlines for months. Patricia Ashworth's champagne glass slipped from her nerveless fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Benjamin had gone completely pale, his mouth opening and closing without sound as he processed what he was seeing. 5, 4, 3, the countdown continued. My mother stood frozen, her perfect composure cracking as she tried to reconcile the reality in front of her with 32 years of dismissing me as the family failure. 2-1 Happy New Year. Fireworks exploded outside the windows, painting the room in brilliant flashes of gold and silver light. But inside the Sterling mansion, nobody was celebrating. 200 of Connecticut's elite stood in stunned silence, phones still recording as they realized they'd just witnessed the family scapegoat's spectacular vindication. My father finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "That's impossible. Victoria never mentioned anyone." Alex's smile was perfectly polite, but carried an edge of steel that made my father take an involuntary step backward. "There's quite a lot about your daughter that you don't know, Mr. Sterling." Charlotte pushed forward, her face flushed with disbelief and something that looked suspiciously like panic. "This is ridiculous. She would have told us if she was engaged." "Wouldn't you, Victoria?" I looked at my sister, this woman who'd spent her entire life basking in the glow of being the golden child, and felt nothing but pity for her obvious distress at losing center stage. "Why would I tell you anything, Charlotte? When have you ever shown genuine interest in my life?" Benjamin stepped forward, extending his hand to Alex with what appeared to be genuine respect mixed with amazement. "Mr. Kane, it's an honor to meet you. Your company's reputation in the tech industry is legendary." Alex shook Benjamin's hand warmly, and I could see him evaluating my brother-in-law and finding him surprisingly decent. "Thank you. And please call me Alex. Any family of Victoria's deserves that courtesy." The emphasis he placed on the word family was subtle but unmistakable. He was making it clear that courtesy was something that had to be earned, not automatically granted. The crowd was beginning to buzz with whispered conversations as the initial shock wore off and people started processing what they'd witnessed. The viral humiliation video that had been so entertaining 5 minutes ago now showed Connecticut society mocking a federal prosecutor who was engaged to one of America's most powerful men. This was about to get very interesting. The whispered conversations grew louder as the reality of who Alex was sank in throughout the room. I could hear fragments of urgent discussions as people pulled out their phones to Google Kane Technologies, confirming what they could hardly believe. The man they'd just watched comfort the family failure was worth $15 billion and commanded one of the most powerful tech companies in America. My mother recovered first, her social instincts kicking in with the desperation of someone trying to salvage a disaster. She practically glided across the room toward us, her face arranged in an expression of delighted surprise that would have been convincing if I didn't know her so well. "Mr. Kane, what a wonderful surprise. Victoria never told us she was seeing anyone, let alone someone so accomplished." Alex's response was polite but glacial. "Mrs. Sterling, Victoria and I have been engaged for 2 years. She's mentioned that you haven't shown much interest in the details of her personal life." The barb hit its mark perfectly. My mother's smile flickered as she realized she'd just been called out for her decades of indifference, and in front of 200 witnesses no less. Charlotte pushed forward, clearly struggling to process how dramatically the evening's dynamics had shifted. 2 years? That's impossible. We would have known about something that important. "Would you?" I asked. finding my voice at last. When have you ever asked me about my life, Charlotte? When have any of you shown genuine curiosity about who I really am or what I've accomplished? The crowd was listening to every word now, phones still recording as they witnessed what was clearly becoming a family reckoning in real time. My father had been standing in stunned silence, but now he stepped forward with the kind of bluster that had served him well in courtrooms, but was failing him spectacularly tonight. "This is all very sudden, Mr. Kane. I hope you'll understand that we need some time to process this information. Victoria has always been very private about her personal relationships. Because she's learned not to trust you with anything important," Alex replied, his voice carrying a note of steel that made several people in the crowd step back instinctively. Just then, as if the evening couldn't become any more surreal, Sarah Chen appeared in the doorway. My colleague looked exactly like what she was, a federal prosecutor arriving at a social event directly from the office, her FBI credentials visible on her belt as she approached our group. "Director Sterling," she said formally, using my official title with perfect timing. "I apologize for interrupting, but we have an update on the Morrison case that requires your immediate attention." The second revelation hit the crowd like a physical wave. Director Sterling. Not Victoria the family disappointment who worked some mundane government job, but Director Sterling, which meant I held a position of significant authority and responsibility. My father staggered backward as if he'd been slapped. "Director, what department?" "Some minor government office." Alex's smile was razor sharp as he answered for me. "Your daughter is the youngest senior federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, Mr. Sterling. Her work prosecuting organized crime and corporate fraud has earned her recognition at the highest levels of government." More gasps rippled through the crowd. Benjamin was staring at me with something approaching awe, finally understanding exactly who he'd been trying to have a genuine conversation with all evening. Charlotte grabbed Benjamin's arm, her face pale as the implications crashed over her. "You prosecute organized crime like real criminals, like the Morrison family money laundering operation that involved $250 million and resulted in 47 convictions," Sarah supplied helpfully. "Director Sterling led that investigation personally." The viral humiliation video that guests had been so eager to share on social media now showed Greenwich Society mocking one of the country's most powerful federal prosecutors while she stood engaged to a billionaire. The optics were becoming more catastrophic by the minute. My mother attempted damage control with the desperation of someone watching their social standing crumble in real time. "We've always been so proud of Victoria's career. Haven't we, Richard? We just wish she shared more details with us about her work. 2 hours ago you were laughing about my little government job," I said quietly. "Nothing has changed about who I am or what I do. The only thing that's changed is your perception of whether it's worth respecting." The crowd murmured uncomfortably, recognizing the truth in my words and perhaps seeing reflections of their own conditional approval and social climbing in my family's behavior. Benjamin stepped forward, his voice carrying genuine remorse. "Victoria, I owe you an apology. We all do. I had no idea about your position or your engagement, but that's no excuse for how you've been treated tonight." His words hung in the air, the first genuine acknowledgement from anyone in my family's circle about what had just transpired. Alex's hand tightened protectively around my waist, and I realized that this moment, awful as it had been to endure, was also liberating in ways I hadn't expected. The scared little girl who'd spent decades seeking approval from people incapable of giving it was finally completely gone. Sarah's presence had created the perfect opening for what I knew would be the evening's final revelation. As the crowd processed the reality of my federal prosecutor position, I caught Benjamin's eye and saw the exact moment when understanding began to dawn on his face. "Sarah," I said, speaking clearly enough for the entire room to hear, "have there been any updates on the TechSecure competitive bidding case?" The color drained completely from Benjamin's face. My father, who had been trying to regain his composure, suddenly looked like he might be sick. Yes, Director Sterling, Sarah replied with perfect professional timing. The final presentations were completed today. The decision will be announced tomorrow morning, but I understand Kane Technologies delivered an exceptional proposal. The silence in the room was so complete, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking from the hallway. Alex's arm tightened around my waist, not possessively but supportively, as he realized what was about to unfold. I turned to look directly at my father, whose face had gone through several colors in rapid succession. Dad, you represent TechSecure in their bid for the government contract, don't you? The company competing against Kane Technologies, Richard Sterling, the man who'd spent 40 years intimidating opponents in courtrooms across Connecticut, looked like a small child caught in a lie. The contract he'd been so confident about winning the deal that would benefit the Ashworth family's banking investments was the same contract his future son-in-law had been pursuing. The implications hit the crowd in waves. My father had spent the evening working to destroy Alex's business while simultaneously humiliating me for being alone. The irony was so complete, it felt orchestrated by some cosmic sense of justice. Benjamin stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. The Kane Technologies contract. That's the deal our bank has been betting against. The financial stakes suddenly became clear to everyone in the room. The Ashworth family fortune had been positioned to profit from Alex's failure, making this personal beyond just the professional rivalry. Charlotte grabbed Benjamin's arm, panic replacing her earlier smugness. What does this mean for us? Before Benjamin could answer, Eleanor appeared at the top of the main staircase. My grandmother moved slowly, but with determination, supported by her nurse, but clearly intent on making this journey downstairs. The crowd parted respectfully as she made her way toward our group. "Victoria, darling," she said when she reached us. Her voice carrying despite its frailness, I heard voices and wanted to meet this young man. You've finally decided to share with the family. Alex stepped forward and took Eleanor's hand gently, his voice warm with genuine respect. "Mrs. Sterling, it's an honor to meet you. Victoria speaks of you constantly. And you're the one who sees her worth when her own family has been blind to it," Eleanor replied, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the scene around us. She turned to address the crowd, her voice gaining strength as she prepared to deliver what I sensed would be her final public statement. "Since we're sharing family news tonight, I have an announcement of my own. I've rewritten my will, leaving my entire estate to Victoria. $50 million plus the Cape Cod house and all my investments." The gasps from the crowd were audible this time. My father staggered backward as if he'd been physically struck. "Mother, you can't be serious," he said, his voice cracking with disbelief. "I'm completely serious, Richard. I've spent years documenting how this family has treated Victoria, and I've decided that cruelty shouldn't be rewarded with inheritance." Charlotte's face went white as the implications sank in. Not only had she lost her position as the family's golden child, but she'd also just lost access to the family fortune she'd probably been counting on for decades. My mother made one last desperate attempt at damage control. "Mother Sterling, surely we can discuss this privately. There's been so much confusion tonight." "There's been no confusion, Margaret. There's been a revelation. Tonight you showed 200 people exactly who you are, and fortunately for Victoria, she finally showed them who she is too." The crowd was buzzing with whispered conversations as people processed the complete reversal of everything they thought they knew about the Sterling family dynamics. The viral videos they'd been so eager to share would now show them participating in the public humiliation of one of the country's most powerful prosecutors, engaged to a billionaire and heir to a $50 million fortune. Alex leaned down to whisper in my ear. "Ready to get out of here," I nodded, suddenly exhausted by the emotional whiplash of the evening. We'd accomplished more than I'd ever imagined possible, but I was ready to leave this battlefield behind. The reckoning was complete, and tomorrow would bring the consequences of tonight's revelations. 1 month later, I sat in my Manhattan office, overlooking the East River reviewing case files, while the February snow fell softly outside my windows. The aftermath of that New Year's Eve had unfolded exactly as I'd expected, with consequences that rippled through Greenwich society and beyond. The viral video of my father's public humiliation had spread far beyond Connecticut's social circles. Within days, it had reached the legal community where Richard Sterling's reputation for professional judgment came under serious scrutiny. The Connecticut Bar Association launched an investigation into his conduct, not because of what he'd done to me personally, but because the video raised questions about his ability to maintain appropriate professional boundaries, represent clients effectively. 3 major corporate clients terminated their relationships with his law firm within the first week of January. The optics were simply too damaging. How could they trust their legal representation to a man who displayed such poor judgment in his personal life, especially when that judgment was captured on video for the world to see? My mother faced her own social consequences. The Greenwich Charity Board, where she'd served as president for 8 years, quietly asked for her resignation. The official reason was a restructuring initiative, but everyone understood the real motivation. Margaret Sterling had become a liability to organizations that depended on public goodwill and respectable reputations. Charlotte's marriage ironically seemed to be growing stronger rather than weaker. Benjamin had shown remarkable character in the weeks following the party, repeatedly defending me to anyone who questioned the family dynamics they'd witnessed. He'd also been surprisingly vocal about his discomfort with his family's business practices, leading to some tense conversations with his father about ethical banking relationships. My grandmother Eleanor had passed peacefully in her sleep, just 2 weeks after New Year's Eve, as if she'd been holding on just long enough to see justice served. The will reading had been swift and decisive with no legal challenges from my parents. Even Richard's lawyer advised against contesting Eleanor's final wishes, given the documented evidence of emotional abuse she'd carefully preserved for 30 years. The Kane Technologies contract had been awarded to Alex's company as expected. The decision was based purely on merit, technical superiority, and cost-effectiveness, though I'm sure my father's team tried to find ways to challenge the outcome. Alex's $750 million victory had been featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, along with a photo of him that still made my heart skip a beat. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex, who was traveling again for business. "Dinner at 8 tonight, I have something special to show you." I smiled and typed back my response. "It's a date." Our engagement had moved from secret to very public, with wedding plans now underway for a small ceremony in Martha's Vineyard this summer. We'd decided on intimate rather than elaborate, focusing on people who genuinely cared about our happiness, rather than social obligations or family expectations. My parents had made several attempts at reconciliation through carefully worded letters and awkward phone calls. They'd even sent expensive gifts and invitations to family dinners that I politely declined. I'd learned the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, between releasing anger for my own peace and subjecting myself to continued dysfunction for their comfort. Forgiveness was something I could do for myself, a way of releasing the bitterness that served no purpose in my new life. But reconciliation required genuine change, real accountability, and demonstrated respect over time. So far, my family had offered apologies that focused more on their embarrassment than on the decades of harm they'd caused. Maybe someday that would change. Maybe they would do the deep work necessary to become people worthy of a relationship with me. But I wasn't holding my breath, and more importantly, I wasn't building my happiness around that possibility. I'd found my real family in Alex, in colleagues like Sarah, who respected my work, and friends who celebrated my successes without jealousy or condition. Eleanor had been right about chosen family mattering more than biological connections, and I'd finally built a life that reflected that wisdom. If you're watching this and you've lived through similar family dynamics, I want you to know something important. Your worth isn't determined by people too damaged to recognize it. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away from toxicity and build your own family with people who see your value clearly. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. Protecting your peace isn't selfish. And you don't owe anyone access to your success, your happiness, or your authentic self just because you share DNA with them. If you've been the family scapegoat who became the success story, I see you and I celebrate you. If you're still waiting for toxic family members to change, remember this. You deserve love without conditions, respect without begging, and celebration without competition. Have you experienced family dynamics like these? How did you handle setting boundaries with people who refuse to see your worth? Share your story in the comments below, and if this resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone in this journey.